Hello, I'm Ben Johnson. John Engel asked me to do this DVD on carrier-based obturation systems for his new edition of his textbook, Endodontics. I'm more than happy to do so. But before we talk about this, I'd like to have a brief discussion with you about endodontics in general. First of all, we know that the presence of bacteria is the sole cause for failure in endodontics. And we know the triad of success in endodontics is cleaning and shaping, sterilization, and obturation. Number one in importance is your cleaning and shaping procedures and your antibacterial steps that you take during treatment. This is what creates the healthy environment within the root canal system that allows the periapical tissues to heal. Obturation merely maintains this healthy environment that you've created with those previous steps. I don't say this to minimize the importance of obturation. In fact, Engel in the Washington report pointed out that 63 to 64% of the failures in endodontics is attributable to poor obturation. I merely make these statements to place obturation in proper perspective.
Grossman classified endodontic filling materials into three categories: solids, plastics, and paste. The solids principally have been represented by silver points and similar materials throughout history. The silver points fell into disfavor in the mid to late 60s, being replaced by the majority of clinicians by gutta percha. Gutta percha being an excellent example of the plastics classification of obturation materials. Gutta percha, of course, has been used in lateral condensation, as you see in this case, or vertical compaction of warm gutta percha, as in this lower molar. Those are the two principal techniques utilizing the plastic classes of filling materials. Root canal sealer is the third classification of filling materials. Any number of products are on the market that allow clinicians to do paste fills if they so choose, or certainly they should use it in conjunction with silver points or gutta percha. The only technique that utilizes all three classifications of filling materials is carrier-based obturation, as in this lower molar obturated with thermofill. If you will forgive me, I'll refer to all these techniques with the term thermofill, since that was the first one on the market and the one that I developed and commercialized, and all are used in the same basic fashion, although their designs differ. Now, before we get into the technique itself, I'd like to discuss with you a few of the reasons why I developed this technique. Frank Wine pointed out in a lecture early in my career that unless gutta percha is condensed, it has no advantage over silver points. Walton had a paper published in the early 70s that pointed out that the apical seal is created no further than a millimeter or two in advance of the spreader. So however far the spreader goes down into the root canal system, that's as far as you create an apical seal. Now, lateral condensation has been referred to as a standard to which all other obturation techniques are measured, and this is an example of lateral condensation technique that is done very, very well. In fact, there were 43 accessory cones used in this obturation. I don't know of any clinicians who utilize that many accessory cones, and when performed thoroughly, lateral condensation will actually obturate accessory and multiple apical foramina, as is demonstrated in this case that I did early in my career. These are some of the realizations that encouraged me to develop an obturation system utilizing warm gutta percha, where it is carried to the terminus of the root canal system and condensed to the terminus of the root canal. Carrier-based obturation systems such as thermofill, soft core, dense fill, GT obturators, and pro-taper obturators all consist of a central carrier. Generally speaking, they're made of plastic, some with grooves, some without, and coated with gutta percha. Some of the advertisers refer to this as alpha phase gutta percha. Indeed, it is beta phase gutta percha, which is the same chemical formula as your flexible gutta percha points, but this has been annealed with a heating process that results in a gutta percha that upon examination is brittle. If you analyze it, you will find that the molecular weight is about half that of flexible gutta percha, and it has a lower melting temperature, about 5 degrees centigrade lower, and it has an increased flow rate. But when you touch it after heating, you will notice that it is tacky. Now, in this enclosed system, this gutta percha is a viscous fluid, and as the diameter of the canal narrows, the velocity of the gutta percha increases. So if you have a long tapering canal, the gutta percha speeds ahead of the carrier, and the carrier comes through, condensing it to the terminus of the root canal. This is an early clinical case demonstrating how well the gutta percha and sealer flows throughout the root canal system. Here is a 25-year recall of that particular tooth. If the diameter of the canal does not narrow, the velocity of the gutta percha does not increase. It is the same rate of speed as the insertion of the carrier. The carrier again condensing it against the apical zone. This gives you adequate apical control, as you can see in this case, using a size 140 that I used to obturate with a thermofill system. With these systems, you sever the carriers, leaving it as an integral part of the root canal filling. What does this do for you? Well, warm gutta percha, when it cools, shrinks. This is why we like to compact the gutta percha during the cooling phase. Here is a product from Hygienic called Ultrafill that consists of a gutta gun, a way of introducing gutta percha into the root canal system. They claimed it did not require any condensation. This is a plastic block I obturated with Ultrafill, and at the time it was a complete obturation. I put the block away. 5 years later I took it out of my drawer, and you can see what shrinkage occurred with that particular obturation system of gutta percha without condensation. One of the other cavities in the same block was obturated with a handmade thermofill device, and you can see 5 years later no shrinkage occurred. So the big advantage of carrier-based obturators over other warm gutta percha techniques is not only does it condense the gutta percha to the terminus of the root canal system, it also remains as an integral part of the filling, reducing the volume of gutta percha that's there. Of course, shrinkage is a volumetric measure. In most cases, the carrier constitutes somewhere between 70 and 80% of the volume of the root canal space. Let's look clinically at how you use these systems effectively. However, viewing this presentation will not replace reading the instruction manual. I'm merely describing the technique for you. This is an upper molar requiring endodontic treatment. We instrumented the canals utilizing profile instruments, and the tooth was ready for obturation. I like to check for patency before drying the root canals, and here you can see a number 15 file slipping through the apices. This particular tooth had 4 canals. The MB2 joined the MB1 about halfway down the canal. Thoroughly dry all of the canals utilizing paper points, and while the canals are being dried, have your assistant mix your sealer and start heating your obturators that you have selected for use. When your thermofill devices are heated, introduce a small amount of sealer into the canals utilizing a paper point. Under the microscope, this appears to be a lot of sealer, but as you will notice, this is a size 20 paper point, and I use the same paper point and sealer to place into the distal buccal canal. I place the sealer in all the root canals at the same time. However, I use a resin sealer that has a long working time. Insert the thermofill device to the working length. It requires no more than 1 or 2 seconds to place the device. Sever the shaft with a preppy burr, and with a lubricated plugger condense the gutta percha alongside the shaft. Next, I'll obturate the 4th canal to the junction of the mesiobuccal canal. Again, sever the shaft, and with your lubricated plugger, and this is a number 8 or 8.5 posterior plugger, condense the gutta percha around the shaft. You'll notice, as I obturate the distal buccal canal, some of the sealer backflows up the canal. This takes the path of least resistance, which is generally up the wider canal instead of out into the apical area. Again, condense the gutta percha around the shaft. This is a very important part of the obturation technique and should not be skipped. Finally, obturation of the palatal canal. Sever the shaft and condense the gutta percha alongside the carrier. Once obturation of all the canals is complete, warm a piece of gutta percha, and I generally have number 140 gutta percha points I have cut into segments available. Warm it in a flame and condense it across the floor of the chamber. This is important because some accessory canals come off the orifice or off the floor of the chamber. This step should not be skipped during any obturation technique. Once the case is obturated, take a good straight-on X-ray, and you'll notice the graceful curves and thorough obturation of the root canal system. And with an X-ray taken from a distal angle, you can see both canals in the mesiobuccal root join halfway down the canal. You will see on the palatal canal where there are actually 3 different apical openings, with a little excess sealer being present. Now this is how the carrier-based obturation techniques are utilized. Let's look at it from what happens in the tooth. This is a tooth that Giuseppe Cantatori cleared and rehardened, and he is going to obturate the upper canal utilizing thermophil, and this is the carrier placed for sizing, and he is going to obturate the bottom canal with System B. The insertion of the obturator is slowed down dramatically. This entire obturation took only 2 seconds. This is done in slow motion to show how the gutta percha flows into the communications between the 2 canals and fill both apical foramen. You will notice the carrier does lie against the side of the root in some areas. Once the upper canal is obturated with thermophil, Giuseppe will come back and obturate the lower canal with System B, and you can see the heat carrier coming in and plasticizing and condensing the gutta percha, and some of the fluid that was not dried out of those isthmuses is now in this canal and being extruded. You can see both techniques do an excellent job of obturating the root canal system. There is a small void present halfway down on the lower one with the System B. You can see the carrier resting against the wall on the thermophil obturated canal. But both systems do an excellent job of obturating the entire root canal system. In which cases should you consider the use of a carrier-based obturation system? Well, with any tooth where the spreader or heat carrier cannot reach the apical 2 to 4 millimeters of the root canal system. These are good indications for utilizing a carrier-based type of obturation technique. In other words, on most molars you encounter. On this upper molar you can see that a spreader or heat carrier would not be able to go 1/3 of the way down the root canal system. Thermophil not only carried thermoplasticized gutta percha and sealer to the terminus of the root canals, but it also condensed it to the terminus. We like to have close adaptation of our filling materials to the root canal walls with a thin layer of sealer. This is a tooth that was obturated with thermophil without the use of sealer, and you can actually see the gutta percha moving into the dental tubules. There are at least 3 articles in the literature that have demonstrated thermophil gutta percha moving into dental tubules, and you don't get any closer adaptation than that. This is an interesting research project where extracted teeth were obturated with thermophil. The teeth were decalcified, and with a scalpel the dentin was incised on the buccal and lingual aspects, and the dentin pulled away from the obturation. Then scanning electron microscope pictures were taken of both the dentin and the gutta percha, and you can see how the thermophil obturation fits exactly into the dental tubules. Now let's talk a little bit about the flow of gutta percha and sealer within the root canal system. This is a lower molar, C-shaped canal with a lesion on the mesial aspect of the root where we suspected a lateral canal to be present. When I finished with my instrumentation and drying procedures, I obturated the distal canal, severed the shaft, and condensed the gutta percha around the carrier and immediately took a radiograph. You can see the sealer and gutta percha took the path of least resistance, flowing down the canal to the terminus and then backflowing up the mesial root of the tooth, not out the apex. I then obturated the mesial canal, severed the shaft, and condensed the gutta percha. Now you can see a well-condensed, completed obturation with sealer and gutta percha filling in the isthmuses between the mesial and distal canals. Let me point out obturation of a lateral canal on the mesial aspect, which was the source of that lesion, along with a little excess filling material at the apex. Now, many clinicians, in fact a large number of clinicians, feel uncomfortable with excess filling material at the apex. How do you feel about excess filling material at the lateral canal? Most clinicians feel good about that. I find that amusing since the same cellular elements are present both in the periodontal ligament at the location of lateral canals and the terminus of the root canals. Why would you feel good about excess filling material with lateral canals and not feel good about it at the apex? In fact, numerous studies have shown that indeed this doesn't play a significant part in success or failure. It is just a consequence of thorough obturation of the root canal system. I would expect this case to heal, and in fact, here's a 2-year recall showing excellent healing occurring. Here's a lower cuspid that belongs to a young man involved in a car accident where the oral surgeon has placed a bar in the mandible to stabilize the fractures. Internal resorption occurred on this tooth, accompanied by necrosis. How important is condensation of the gutta percha along the shaft? Actually, it's very important. The carrier introduces and carries the gutta percha to the terminus and condenses it at the terminus, but we don't always have a tapering, funnel form preparation. This tooth was obturated with a number 50 thermofill device, and here's the obturation immediately after severing the thermofill carrier, and you can see the internal resorptive defect. It is pretty well filled, but you can see a void there in the upper right-hand portion of it. I then condensed the gutta percha, added a small piece of gutta percha to the orifice, and condensed it down into the thermoplasticized mass of gutta percha and took another X-ray. And here you can see the completed obturation where the internal resorptive defect is completely obturated with some excess sealer extruded on the mesial aspect of the root. Here is the case with a 2-year recall showing excellent healing. Now, thermofill was quite controversial when it first came out. Perhaps some endodontists felt threatened by it, I don't know, but for whatever reason it's one of the most researched obturation materials in history. At this point in time, there are over 120 published articles concerning thermofill. This is but a few of them. The ones marked in red are the ones that either had procedural errors or misinterpretation of the data. This is a listing of the assessment of the apical seal of thermofill obturation technique, and you can see it is quite extensive. This is by no means a complete listing of the articles published. One of the ones that had a procedural error was comparison of thermoplastic obturation techniques done by Dr. Weller at Georgia and published in the Journal of Endodontics. This compared obtura obturations with thermofill obturations and with lateral condensation. They used an extracted tooth that was sectioned longitudinally and embedded into acrylic so it could be put together and removed to do these obturations, and 4 little holes were made in the side of the canal with round burrs. The object was to obturate the tooth using no sealer so they could use the same tooth again and again just to see how well the gutta percha adapted to these holes made into the canal walls. When they used the thermofill device, they held the carrier for 1 minute in place before they severed it. They severed it with a water spray, and they tried to condense the gutta percha alongside the carrier with a number 11 plugger. Now, a number 11 plugger would be very appropriate for obtura, but it is inappropriate for thermofill because you have the carrier in place, and a number 11 plugger is much too large to condense the gutta percha with. Also, there is no reason to wait for a minute before severing the shaft, and you certainly shouldn't sever it with a water spray, because that would tend to cool the gutta percha before it can be condensed. In the article is this photograph of an obturation. You can see that the gutta percha adapted to those little divots in the root canal walls very nicely. Thermofill wasn't bad as far as this adaptation goes, and you can see bare carrier in a couple of spots there in the apical area. This is the lateral condensation technique, which did not adapt well to the defects placed in the canal walls. But what struck me about this particular photograph is I do not see a size 60 master cone anywhere. This was very poor lateral condensation. So I asked Dr. Weller if he would kindly send me the tooth so that I could redo this thermofill obturation utilizing it properly. This is the tooth that Dr. Weller sent me, and you can see that it is well prepared. There you can see the divots made by the round burrs in the canal walls. You can see it is not perfectly round or perfectly tapered. Most root canal systems have irregularities, and this is no different than the others. We placed it back together, put a size 60 thermofill carrier into the canal, and this is a number 11 posterior shoulder plugger, and you can see that it only enters the orifice 1/2 millimeter. It doesn't penetrate the canal at all. This would be an inappropriate size for condensing alongside the carrier. This is a number 8.5 posterior plugger, and you can see that it will enter the orifice about 2 millimeters. That is an adequate amount for condensing the gutta percha alongside the shaft. We use no sealer, as Dr. Weller did in his case. I took the thermofill device out of the oven, inserted it to the apex, taking no longer than 2 seconds to insert it, and using a lubricated plugger, condensed the gutta percha alongside the shaft. I inserted a short piece of gutta percha, about 4 or 5 millimeters long, into the thermoplasticized mass, and with a number 11 plugger, condensed the back side of it. That sends a wave of condensation throughout the root canal system. And then using an 8.5 plugger, condense that piece of gutta percha, so it's part of the root canal filling. After the gutta percha cools, I separated the two halves, and you can see very nice adaptation of the gutta percha to the holes created in the dentinal walls. And you can see some bare carrier. Don't be concerned, because when you look at the other half of the tooth, you will find gutta percha adhering to that side. This is an example of gutta percha moving into dentinal tubules, and you will see this quite frequently when you separate extracted teeth done with thermofill obturations. It has excellent adaptation to the root canal walls. Now, there have been many different articles done assessing the quality of the apical seal of thermofill compared to other techniques, and investigators have different ways of assessing the obturations. Thermofill compared to lateral condensation, comparing apical seal. Here we looked at 22 published articles. Thermofill was shown to be significantly better than lateral condensation in 10 of those studies. Lateral condensation was shown to be significantly better than thermofill in 2 studies, and in 10 studies there was shown to be no statistical difference. Thermofill also has been compared to vertical compaction of warm gutta percha. Here are 5 studies that have been published. Thermofill was shown to be significantly better in 2 studies. Vertical condensation was shown to be significantly better in 2 studies, and there was no difference in the other study. Thermofill versus System B. Here are 4 studies that have been published. Thermofill was significantly better than System B in 1 study. System B was not shown to be significantly better than thermofill in any of the studies. At this point in time, as I've mentioned before, there have been over 120 published articles using thermofill, and in 75% of those studies or greater, Thermofill has been shown to be superior to or equal to the other techniques that have been studied. Something that I've noticed is that in all of these studies, no authors have pointed out the distribution of sealer. This is a study done by Gutman, Saunders, and Saunders, where they did dye penetration studies and radiographic assessment of the apical seal. Thermofill on the right, lateral condensation on the left. They cleared the tooth, and this is what it looked like afterwards. You will notice on the Thermofill obturation, there is a thin film of sealer completely surrounding the carrier and gutta percha, whereas with the lateral condensation, you will see 40 to 60% of the gutta percha bare of sealer. In Phillips' textbook, if you look up gutta percha, you will find the quotes that gutta percha exhibits low flow and high rigidity and does not adapt well to tooth structure. Few filling materials in dentistry exhibit as much gross marginal leakage as gutta percha. This is why it is very important to use sealer. It's truly the sealer that creates the seal with your various gutta percha techniques. The only technique that gives you even distribution of sealer within the root canal system is the carrier-based obturation techniques. One of the negatives of carrier-based obturation, if you believe that excess extrusion of sealer and gutta percha are a significant negative, is extrusion of sealer. I, for one, view it as a consequence of three-dimensional obturation of the root canal system. In almost all of the studies that deal with extrusion of filling materials, Thermofill extrudes the most. There is clear evidence that warm gutta percha techniques tend to extrude more filling materials than lateral condensation. Thermofill tends to extrude more filling material than vertical condensation or System B. The risk of extrusion in Thermofill cases is greater in straight canals than in curved canals, so any technique that offers you three-dimensional filling of the root canal system, there is likely to be a high percentage of cases that will have some extrusion of filling material. Here's a case of a lower incisor obturated with Thermofill, and you can see some excess filling material periapically. 6 months later, you see that most of this has been resorbed and the lesion is healing. So most of this particular extrusion was sealer. This particular case is one that I did years ago. You can see the apex was resorbed somewhat, and unfortunately I also over-instrumented the root canal system, and when I obturated it, I had a gross overfill. This is the largest overfill that I've ever experienced, but here is a recall that is greater than 10 years, and you can see excellent healing. Most of this extrusion is gutta percha, because after 10 years, sealer would certainly have been resorbed. I, for one, do not feel that overextension of root canal fillings plays a part in failure of endodontics. In fact, I have reached the point in my life, if I don't see a little material extruded, then I'm afraid that I have pulp tissue or debris in the apical areas, and that, of course, will harbor bacteria. So I view a little bit of extrusion as an indication that the terminus of the root canal is relatively clean and patent. To repeat, so in any case where you have a very long or curved root canal system, where the spreader is not capable of reaching the apical areas, or the heat carrier is not capable of reaching the apical areas, you should consider using a carrier-based obturation system so that you can introduce your sealer and gutta percha to the apical areas and condense it to the terminus of the root canal. In this particular case, Thermofill was used in all 4 canals because of the extreme length and narrow diameter and curvature in this case. Here's a lower molar where the mesial canals are extremely curved. The distal canal has minor curvature in the apical 4 to 5 millimeters. So this case was obturated with System B in the distal root and Thermofill in the mesial roots, and you can see excellent obturation in all of the root canals present. If you're encountering cases with curvature, excessive length, small diameters, these are all perfect indication for the use of carrier-based obturators. Now these are 3 teeth on the same patient that I treated in 3 different decades of my practice career. One is done with lateral condensation, one is done with vertical compaction of warm gutta percha, and one was obturated with Thermofill. You can't tell which is which. More importantly, the patient's periapical tissues cannot tell the difference either.
As I stated at the beginning of this presentation, Obturation merely maintains the healthy environment that you've created with your cleaning and shaping procedures within the root canal system. This allows the periapical tissues to respond appropriately. When you're faced clinically with a long canal or canals with moderate to severe curvature, you should consider using carrier-based obturation systems. Thank you.